right, so I'm going to jump right on in and introduce our speaker. Well, I won't say speaker, but our partner today, Alyssa Hall. Alyssa is an African-American Cuban woman, and of course, she is a life coach. She did her training at iPEC, and upon completing her training, she began her journey coaching corporate leaders and business owners on mindset and on leadership. She now uses those same skills to coach them on anti-racism. Her main area of focus is strengthening the leadership skills needed to have an anti-racist environment. Alyssa also focuses on the personal growth each individual needs to go through in order to become anti-racist themselves, and uses her own experiences as a Black woman to call attention to certain issues that may not be highlighted in the broader community. So Alyssa, thank you so much for your time today and for joining us. I'm really excited to have this conversation for sure. And now that I know you a little bit, I just ask that maybe you share a little bit more about your journey so that our listeners can learn a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm just incredibly excited to be here. And I just love talking about my journey because I remember when I finished my coach training, it was just like, okay, so now what do I do? I want to do this badly. I think I know what I want to do. And for me, I left coach training wanting to do career transition. And that is what I thought I wanted to do. And I was very excited. And I worked with people in corporate. And then I ended up working with a couple of entrepreneurs on like similar transition-y things. And it was a little boring for me. And so then I was like, you know what? I like digging more into them as a human. And I decided, let me do mom coaching. I'm a mom and I'll help moms pursue their passions. And I was into it, but then after, it's so funny the date that we're doing this, because it's literally a couple days to the date of George Floyd's murder. And before we got on the phone, we had been speaking around not just that, but also the Amy Cooper situation. And putting myself back where I was a year ago, I remember hearing about the Amy Cooper situation and being just livid, completely frustrated and just livid, to the point where when I heard about George Floyd, I was like, I don't want to hear anymore. Like, just, I'm still mad about this. Another Black man was murdered. This is an ongoing thing. I don't want to engage in this right now. I'm still mad about this. Don't talk to me about that. But then to see what was happening in the online world and just everywhere as a response from George Floyd's murder was a huge shift from the response that I'm typically used to. It's usually, and I'm sure now that we're a year out, you see how these discussions and conversations typically happen. This thing happened, we're upset, and then everyone seems to move on. And just being so used to that, that journey, when it happened a year ago, that's what I was prepared for. And I did not want to be on that bus. And when I saw how everyone else was reacting, but more so the way that a lot of leaders in the online community were interacting with it or not interacting with it, or making these huge mistakes, and everyone seeming very lost and confused in how to interact. For me, what it opened my eyes to was how these seem like normal conversations to me because I'm a Black woman and this is happening in my community. But seeing how lost and confused everyone else was, I just started going on Facebook and I was just like, well, this, and this. This, just really talking about it and talking about how coaching is brought into it and using coaching techniques to help people have these difficult conversations, because these are things that they aren't used to having. And I was just like, oh, this is the thing that I thought everyone knew. I thought this was just the norm, and seeing how much of the norm that it wasn't. And when that started happening, I no longer cared about the mom coaching. I no longer cared about any of that. That felt so unimportant. And for me, I ended up leaning more into, and this is something that to this day always drives me, and now everything that I do, what is the greater impact here? That is a question that I always ask myself. And that's what I asked myself in that moment of, I could not see in that moment what the impact was for mom coaching, and it was boring me then. And here I'm like, oh my goodness, I could actually make a difference in places where I've been harmed and make it so that other people like me will not be harmed. And by doing so, by helping coaches and other service providers understand what anti-racism is, how to build these structures in their businesses, and help them on their journey, I'm now making it so that hopefully less people will have to have the experiences that I've had from service providers that didn't check their biases and didn't know what was going on in speaking to a diverse population.
So in your practice, do you work mostly with leaders in corporate environments, kind of like how when you first started out, or are you finding that you're working more with coaches and service providers in helping them to be more, I guess, culturally conscious, leaning in the name of the conversation, right? But to be more, conscious and aware of culture, and specifically our biases as it relates to anti-racism and or other areas in that regard.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Right now, I'm focusing more heavily on those service providers because I'm automatically able to see like the almost like one-to-one impact of they're working with me. They're going to have 20 clients, and those 20 clients are now going to have a safe space. And they're going to have an amazing experience with this coach because of that. But to be very honest, I really want to start shifting into having that, of course, but then also going back to working with leaders in those larger spaces, because that's another huge impact in ways that I feel like are just taken as the norm, but they should not be the norm. And I feel like not only because of what has happened with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also with this pandemic, a lot of employers have shifted in what is okay, what is not okay, what is professional, what are we now seeing as our standards and our norms, versus before it was extremely toxic, and there's still toxicity there. But the conversations are being had deeper, and being able to help the people that are in those industries by working with the people up top with the leaders.
And then on the coaching side, working with coaches who are working with these leaders also helps to exponentially, grow your impact. But let's say, okay, Alyssa, I'm a coach, and someone says to me, Dionne, you should really think about working with Alyssa Hall. She's an anti-racism coach, and she helps, us to identify what our awareness gaps are and help us better understand what spiritual bypassing is. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. How do you explain that to someone so that they understand why there may be a need to engage?
Yes, that is really like the biggest piece, right? And what I think about is, I slightly alluded to it earlier, but just the experience that I had, and it's gonna be a little quick story, but I had an experience with a therapist when I was, I think I was maybe like 21, and I had been going through severe depression. I had just like finally seen the light after a traumatic event. And I was like, okay, I really want to just continue going to school, but it was very hard because of my depression, which then triggered anxiety. Plus I was a pre-med student, all of these internal pressures. And so I went to a therapist, and it was something I knew I needed to do, but I never felt comfortable enough to do. So I was so excited to finally go see her. And I went there, and it was the first session. I started talking a little bit about why I'm here, how we all do our intro sessions. Why are you here? Blah, blah. And I was explaining to her what my experience was with the depression that I had been feeling, and talking about why it was important for me to seek therapy. And I was telling her I wasn't doing well in school, and it's because of how depressed I was. It was hard for me to physically get up and go to class. And as I'm telling her my story, she cuts me off, and she essentially tells me that clearly school is too hard for me, and instead I should drop out and just go to a 2-year school, get a nursing degree from the 2-year school, and then if I want to go back, then I can do that. But clearly school is too hard for me. And I was just like, it was the strangest situation of my life. And I was like, I didn't even tell her what was going on. Mind you, I was also a psych nerd. So I'm just like, I know there's a connection between my depression and the way that I'm showing up. So I know that. And because I had that piece of information that is not common knowledge, I knew that there was something wrong in the situation. So she had me book a next appointment. I just played on that computer until it was time to go. And then I just left because I didn't want to cause any weirdness. But I remember walking out the building, and I had called my boyfriend at the time, and I was like, I'm glad I didn't go to this on a really bad depression day. Like, I'm good enough to be able to see that it wasn't me, that she's not saying anything about me. There's clearly something about her. And this is a woman who is a trained therapist, was working in New York City. That's where I lived. And clearly wants to help people, because that's her career. That's her job, right? All of us too. We all signed up for coach training because we want to help people. But what was in that session with us were her biases. Does she know that? Clearly not, but it was there. And helping other people not experience that. And with coaching, there's so many different ways to harm clients in a way that we don't want to. Mm-hmm. Of course, my situation is a little bit more, I don't even want to call it extreme, because I know people have dealt with worse, but it's easy to look at it and say, oh, I would never do that. But just the experience of the hurt and the not feeling heard and having someone else's judgments placed upon me and my decisions, that is something that I feel like there's so many ways coaches can do that by accident. Mm-hmm. And that is the real key piece of this work.
So to that point, just let's say, for sake of those that may have heard your example of what just happened, and kind of saying, well, you did say that you were depressed and you were having a hard time. So help me understand what was wrong in that interaction. Like, what did you process in that maybe the therapist clearly didn't process in that?
Yes. Oh, that is a really good question, because from an outside, or like just from a you just met me today sort of situation, it's easy to think of it of just like, okay, well, what was really wrong? And what was really wrong is that, I'm not saying this to like toot my own horn, but I'm very smart. I'm very smart. I absolutely adore school. I adore learning. I was a pre-med student, not just because I thought it was fun, but because I badly wanted to do that. And I knew that the math and the science, all that stuff is easy for me. Where I noticed what was hard for me was the getting out of bed to get there. And so when someone is saying something and this is my truth, and what they're saying is over here or over here, I'm like, wait, where'd you get that from? How'd you get there when we're over here? And that's where I noticed something was wrong. Where I can see that it had to do with a certain bias was that I was a young Black woman. And there are a lot of biases surrounding Black women in general, but also young Black women. And even though I was like 21, I looked 18. And there's, again, all of these different things that add layers to, oh, well, maybe she is just this and she should just settle for this. And on top of that, hearing experiences that my family members have faced in similar situations, whether it be like with guidance counselors telling them to, oh, you want to be a nurse? What are you doing to be a nurse? Just go to community college and that's it. And that was my aunt. And now she's a retired nurse now, but she went through the whole thing and now she's a nurse. And seeing how these little things are still playing a role. That woman is like, I think she's almost 70. Mm-hmm. And even though it's a huge time gap, those little pieces of biases are still there in different ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's funny you bring that up because you made me think about, as you were telling your story, it made me think about my interaction with my guidance counselor in high school, who was actually a Black woman. And, my grades probably weren't the best because I like to cut class. I was young and stupid, but, I was in all honors classes. And, I had taken the SAT early because we were in the honors and advanced placement classes. And my guidance counselor told me that I should go to community college or consider a trade school. And I'm like, why in the world would you? Because I said to her, I told her where I wanted to go and what I wanted to major and what I was thinking. And she was like, yeah, you should consider going to community college or to a trade school. I'm in honors and advanced placement classes. Mm-hmm. Like, why in the world would you even steer me in that direction? And she was a Black woman herself, but she felt that was a safer, because I asked her and said, that's a safer environment. And you'd be able to come out and find yourself a job more easily than if you were to pursue what you're wanting to pursue. If you wanted to go into business, the likelihood of you succeeding is substantially less. Merely because, the color of my skin. And she thought that she was helping me.
Right.
Giving me this advice. So yeah, this is not uncommon for this to happen at all. So then what advice would you give to service providers and to coaches in order to help them become aware of some of these unconscious biases they may have, and or recognizing how to, because we're taught certain techniques on how to help people to look at things differently and reshape their perspective on situations, but sometimes that may not necessarily be the best approach in a moment, right? So right. What advice would you give to coaches to say, these are things you need to be thinking about?
Right. It's literally so funny. I have my little whiteboard behind me and I was just on a call with a client talking about this, but it's really, there's two key pieces here. Number one, it's remembering what we're taught of meet the client where they are, right? And we feel like we're doing that, and that's fine. But at the same time, there may be things underneath there that you just don't know, or there may be things surrounding the situation that you just don't understand. And the only way to be able to allow yourself to understand is when you notice there's something I'm not getting here, or I feel like there's this unspoken thing that I'm not aware of. Noticing your own knowledge gaps, that is so important. And because of the way that these conversations have been had over these last couple of years surrounding just race relations and just the being woke and all of these things, it's so easy to shame ourselves on how much knowledge we have. But if we sit in the shame of how much knowledge we don't have, then we're never going to be able to grow. And if we tell ourselves that, well, I will just never know all the things, you don't have to know all of the things. You just need to know enough and continue to learn and decide to learn and decide to understand things that you have never experienced, and decide to do that so that when you are in the session with that client and certain things are happening, you're able to at least think to yourself, there may be something underneath. Is that a judgment that we're placing? No. It's just like this little piece of information that we have in the back of like, okay, they're saying this, it sounds a lot like this. I'm going to keep that in the back of my head, or I can ask a question, whatever that looks like. But then also one of the things that we are taught is that, well, not that we're taught, but we really want to help our client move forward. And a lot of times that moving forward comes with the way that we think of self-awareness of, well, how could you have interacted differently there? Or what do you want to think about this situation? When it comes to situations regarding racism, sexism, homophobia, it does not matter what that person does differently, because at the end of the day, the person that they're interacting with still has the racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever it is. And so when in that immediate moment, when we ask that client that, it almost seems like we're placing the responsibility on them to change whatever happened, when in reality, that's not the case. Eventually, we can talk about what would you like to do differently now, or what would you like to do now that we have all this information, or how do you want to think about this experience now that you have all this information? But that's a process, and understanding that we want to get them here. We really want to get them here, and they're right here right now. And we need to help them get there so that they're ready to make that change. And it may not happen in one session, and being okay with that.
Okay, so I'm the coach, and my client has said that they feel that they're experiencing, disparate treatment at work because of their gender, and they're totally distraught. And in my mind, okay, I want to get them out of that hopeless feeling. And so how can they think about this experience differently? How would they? Now I'm hearing you. That's not what I want to say in this moment. So then what is it that I do say to them? Or how do I move them through this in a way where it doesn't seem like, or it feels to them like I'm minimizing their experience?
Yes. So the two very key things here are my favorite tool, and one that I just use without even thinking about it: acknowledging and validating. Always, always, always.
First things you learn, right? Acknowledge and validate. If you don't know anything else, it's acknowledge and validate.
Especially, and this is why I always say you don't need to know everything, right? You just need to believe what they are coming to you with. And that's when I think back to the moment of the therapist. She did not believe that the reason why I'm not doing well in school is because my depression makes it hard to get out of bed. What she believed instead was that school is too hard for me, and I'm also depressed.
A 4-year college is too much for you, which is why you should not that school is too much, because she didn't say don't go to school. She said drop out of this one and go to a 2-year, which is that's more your lane. Stay in your lane. Exactly. You're trying to do way too much that's above your level.
Exactly. And so instead of hearing what was being said in the moment, she was kind of hearing, but then also had her own thoughts and beliefs about me, or just people that look like me, right? So coming back here of what do we do in these situations? First and foremost, acknowledge and validate. But then what that also does is that it allows the client and just everyone involved to just acknowledge what is. What is that they will encounter, if they're a person of color or perceived as a person of color, there is a chance that they will encounter racism. We cannot pretend that that's not there, because then that is not acknowledging their experience or believing their experience. When we acknowledge what is, when we acknowledge the systems that are always at play, that actually empowers the client. Because a lot of times, and unless you've been in these situations, you may not know, but when a person has dealt with a situation facing any of these isms, because they're so abstract, not only do they feel harmed from the event, but then they're also feeling shame, confusion. Am I crazy? Did this actually happen? Am I making myself believe that that's what happened? What is actually going on? And then sometimes there can be another underlying piece of shame where if they interacted in a certain way, right? Like at the time that I went to my therapist, I was not, I have a lot more, I had a lot of conflict aversion. I still have a ton of conflict aversion. I've not grown out of that. But let's say I had cursed her out in that moment, right? And then walked out. Later on, a day later, a week later, I'll be like, oh my God, how dare I act so out of character, out of something so small, minimizing the event in myself, gaslighting myself. So these are all like just multiple layers of things that happen, even if they may not say that to you in a session. These are typically all the things that happen. So being in a space where we can just acknowledge, yes, that happened to you. Yes, that is what's going on. That is so empowering because now they're able to say, oh, thank God I'm not crazy. It wasn't me. There was nothing that I did wrong here. It wasn't me. Okay. I do have power now because I know that that's their stuff. So for me, what do I want to do next with this information that this is what is? I cannot change that. What do I want to do now? But we can't get there until we allow them to acknowledge what is and feel strong enough to go ahead and say, yes, you can do something else now.
And in that, I'm the coach. I'm hearing her story. I'm listening to it. Like say it's your therapist story. And I'm not seeing where the issue really is. It's still not clicking for me. Alyssa, like, why are you upset? You said you're depressed and it's not working. But in listening to what you're saying, I don't necessarily have to, again, believe that is what happened, or believe that you were being discriminated against, or, some micro messaging, which we can get into, is that micro messaging and these microaggressions, how micro really are they? But in this instance, still be able to say, there's something happening, you're feeling this, acknowledge and validate those feelings. And what you're feeling is as a result of what's coming from this person, what is within their control, not within yours.
Exactly.
It makes sense that you're feeling this way. And now this is how we begin to look at now that you've accepted this is how you can move forward. Yes.
Yes. And even just as simple as like, what would you like to do now? That is so like, my client gave me an example of one of her clients who was experiencing something like that in her job. And what her client decided to do was, you know what? I'm just going to stay here for now. And this is going to be my bridge job to my real job. And now I'm not going to give any attention or energy to that nonsense. I know that I am here to put this on my resume. That is the power that they now have because they acknowledged what is, they realized what was not in their power to fix or change and is not their responsibility to. I think that's another thing that's important to acknowledge is that regardless of the relationship between your client and the other person, is not their responsibility to fix the isms that the person has any prejudices over. It's not. And there are moments where we can use the coaching tools of, well, what do you think that other person was thinking? What do you think that other person was experiencing? What do you think were their intentions? Let's think of a list of that. But when it comes to those isms, no. Because what is very important to understand when it comes to the racism, sexism, homophobia is that it's not just bad people who have those tendencies. They can be I'm sure that therapist is like somebody's grandma and someone's mom and is the most lovely person. but she still has those prejudices. Anyone can have them. It doesn't matter what their intention was. So when we put that on the client as well, well, what do you think they were thinking? Do you think that that was their intention? It wasn't about, was that their intention? It's about what happened. How did that land with me based off of the million other microaggressions that connect to this and to the structures that are in place that connect to this?
Yes, it is not about, it is all about the impact and not so much the intent. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I know when we were talking, you mentioned that, you've been working in corporate spaces and you've had clients that are coaches. Would you say, though, that have, at least in this past year with all that's been going on, you've seen an uptick, particularly in the US, or do you have a client base that's outside of the US? And if you do, what is this looking like with them?
Yes. I have a couple of clients from Australia. And I believe, the Australian one was also, she moved from England. So that was another thing that we brought up on the call as well. But it's so interesting to see that the structures that uphold all these isms are very similar in different places, but they just affect different people. They may look slightly different. It's like, it's like that moment where, this is a wild example, but like, how Old Navy and Gap and Banana Republic are all the same person? It's that sort of thing. It's like, oh, wow, this Old Navy shirt looks like this Gap shirt. Oh, that's so interesting. They look similar. And then you realize it's all the same umbrella. That's kind of what it is. They have different target markets. Their clothes look slightly different. The style is slightly different, but it's all the same umbrella. And that's what it is. So even if I were to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement here in the US, that may not be what they're calling it in Australia, and it may not be what they need to call it in Australia, but they're having very similar issues with a very similar root cause, but it's actually harder to have the conversation over there because it's so different in the language of what is actually going on. So that has been very interesting to see.
So then for that executive coach who works with leaders who are in those corporate environments, right? So getting back to maybe some of the work that you were doing in the past, where you were that coach working with leaders in the business. So what advice, if any, would you give to those coaches, particularly where it's like, these are things we need to be thinking about because it's also working with leaders in a business environment, and we need to think about what's happening in their spaces. Right. And one of the things that I just really hammer in is that leadership needs to look a little bit different. We need to start qualifying what leadership looks like a little bit differently so that we're presenting ourselves in a way that is actually going to provide a safe space for people. And that is the job of leaders in the corporate space. It's not just to meet the demands of the business and run things smoothly. That is one piece. And I feel like sometimes when we talk about what leadership is, it sounds like that's the only piece. But it's also about the people that work there. Do they feel safe and comfortable coming to you when something is going on? Are they feeling heard in their position? Are they being challenged in the way that they want to be? Are they just there just to be there? Are they using their strengths? Are they enjoying their job? And that is something that I see a lot of entrepreneurs that left corporate just for the sake of, I don't want to be in corporate. I never had a want to be an entrepreneur, but I'm able to enjoy my job, do things that I love, and feel like I'm being heard in entrepreneurship. But if corporate had that, I would have stayed there. That is the issue. And when I talk with coaches that work with people in leadership, or even when I was working with people in leadership, that was like the key thing of
are you providing that space for people to feel comfortable going to you, feel like if they want something more, they can talk to you about that. They can grow in the way that they want to. That is what's so important. And when I work with coaches, I do that with them within their coaching business, with how they're working with their clients. But what's also so amazing is that when I'm working with coaches, it's really about helping them almost like change what is the norm now. And I love working with like business coaches, for example. A lot of people, if you have like already started looking at building your business, there are a lot of norms surrounding building an online business. And a lot of them are very inequitable, are very not diversity friendly, not inclusive at all, but these are the norms. So through working with me, shifting how they're working with their clients, then now they're spreading out differently. What is the norm in building your business? What is the way to build your business? And it's the exact same thing with working in leaders and with executive coaching.
So I'm that coach, and I'm looking to start my practice, or I'm that business person looking to start my business. And in my mind, I'm developing policies and practices and trying to build this in an equitable way. And I look at my target market as, mid-level managers. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what gender you are. So I'm thinking that I'm just going out and saying I'm trying to reach mid-level managers. But when you look at my approach, you can say, well, there are some things that are not coming across as equitable and or promoting diversity. Mm-hmm. Help me understand what those things might be, Alyssa.
Yes. And this is the key thing that I hear people say a lot in a way to like discount themselves, but it's also just a way to understand, again, what we spoke about before, those learning gaps. You don't know what you don't know. And especially when we're taught a way, there's no reason it's like when you get accepted to school. Once y'all got accepted to iPEC, it wasn't like you were in the middle of the iPEC program, then looking at the 12 other coaching schools while you're doing this thing. You're learning this way. You're going to do this way. You're happy with it. It is amazing. You see how it works, period. And that's how we are with everything. It's normal. It would be exhausting if we just continue to look at all these other different things. But since you don't know what you don't know, it's about learning more what the issues are in different communities. And are we speaking on those issues? Do we even know how to address those issues? What is actually going on here, especially with like executive coaching? I always use the example of corporate because that's where a lot of these structures are heavily in play and they are the norm in corporate. So if you are talking to a white man who is a cisgender white man who is a mid-level manager, he may have very different issues than a Black woman who is a mid-level manager. Do you understand what those issues are? And are you prepared to have that conversation? Are you prepared to hold that space for her? And what is also amazing in, like what I mentioned before, we don't have to know everything, but when you do start knowing things, it opens up so much when you are working with clients. Even just thinking about people who, like I was a mom coach, right? And there would be times where the moms would like talk to me about what is going on in their life and how stressed they are. And I have a toddler and I have all this stuff. And I could acknowledge them in a way that's deeper than it just makes sense, blah, blah, blah. But it makes sense that you are drained because your toddler is at an age where things shift every single day and you're learning a new thing every single day and you're trying to create a new habit every single day. That alone is exhausting. Of course, you feel like you can't catch up to anything. that is a deeper thing that she may not have said, but I know about toddlers, right? Mm-hmm. And that alone can just be like,
experience it by having them, or whether you got that knowledge by way of reading or engaging with others and witnessing it and observing it, but having that knowledge. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that little piece of extra, like that deeper acknowledgement allows her to be like, oh my gosh, you're right. It's not just that I'm too slow. It's that the toddler phase is so fast that we're learning something new every day. Oh my gosh. That is what that looks like. So going back to the example of the corporate, when someone is telling you something that's a little bit deeper, if you don't know how to deeply acknowledge it, if you aren't able to read between the lines that the person may not feel comfortable saying, because that's the other problem too, is that if I don't know that you know anything regarding race, or that, just regarding race, it does not suit me to talk to you about it, because just every time, or not every time, a lot of times when BIPOC speak about their issues, we are gaslit so hard, and it is so painful that when we do seek help in another place, it almost seems safer to just stick with the surface level thing. And maybe I might be seeing this race issue playing out in my job here, but I don't want to go through the process of having to explain my existence to this person. Mm-hmm. And that all goes just like before y'all go, well, how will they know? It goes in your marketing. That's how people will know that you are a safe space, that you are a comfortable person. It's like in that conversation, but also before that conversation. There's so many different layers surrounding being able to deeply help people of diverse communities. It's in that conversation, but it's also beforehand, do they even know that they can come to you? Mm-hmm. That's important as well.
So Coach, when I go to your website, not to say that you have to have every color of the rainbow represented on your website, but is the language inclusive? And are the pictures ones where maybe I do see someone that looks like me, or that I can relate to, whether it's from an age perspective, it's a color perspective, mm-hmm. a size perspective, that totally makes sense. What you were saying too, though, and so two things. First, as you were talking, you mentioned BIPOC. Just in case for those who don't know what that means, what are BIPOC people?
So I feel like it's essentially Black, Indigenous, and people of color. People forget the and it's like, we're not all Black, Indigenous people of color. We're Black people and Indigenous people and people of color.
And other people of color, yes.
So that's the acronym BIPOC. Okay,
awesome. And then for those that don't know, how would you define gaslighting? What does that look like?
Yes. So gaslighting is essentially questioning someone's reality. And that is when I think of a lot of ways that in the coaching space where people can get harmed, this is the way to so easily accidentally do that. Just based off the line of questioning, when we're placing those questions, it can be very easy to feel like you're questioning what I just told you. If I'm telling you that this person was abusive to me and you're asking me, how can I look at that situation differently? Mm-hmm. It feels like you're making me question my reality. And like I mentioned before, 9 times out of 10, by the time the words get out of their mouth of what happened, they've already questioned their own reality 12 different times to make sure that it is actually what they saw, what they felt. And so to have that in a one-to-one conversation, coaching or not, it's very deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone wrote in the chat, it's the difference between second guessing versus actually asking for clarity. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Right. And there's ways to ask for clarity And then there's that's another thing that I also want to bring up. There's a way to ask for clarity. And then there's a way to just ask someone to, again, like I said, explain their entire existence, right? Asking for clarity in the sense of like, oh, so what, these are not actual coaching questions. Don't like rip these and use these, but like the vibe of, wait, tell me exactly what happened. What's going on? That's asking for clarity versus, well, how does that connect to racism? How does that connect to a microaggression? I'm a little confused. That is almost, that's asking the client to do the work for you of explaining race relations, when just in your brain, what you can do is when you're hearing this story, whatever the story is, you can take that piece of, I've never heard that before, or I don't understand how that connects. Let me put that in my pocket and then I'm going to go research it, or I'm going to go ask, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So, and thank you for that. Looking at our time, we are at, we had about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask whatever questions they may have for you. So all of you in the audience, if you have questions for Alyssa, please use the Q&A in the Zoom and or the comment section in the Facebook group, and let's get those questions in for sure.
Yes.
So Alyssa, what have you been finding in your practice while we're waiting for the questions to come in? What have been some of the most prevalent, I guess, questions or scenarios that you've had to deal with?
Yes. And what I've been noticing a lot recently is the big thing from people who have been figuring out if they want to do this work is, am I even qualified? Like, who am I to decide to do this work? How will I even actually help these people? I don't know their experience. I don't know X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the doubt on themselves. And what I really want to just put on everyone is that you're here because you want to help people. That's number one. But number two is that you clearly have a gift. You clearly have a gift of something that you really, really deeply love and care about, or you have a skill. And just imagine what that will look like when you are working with diverse populations, how you can help other people with that exact same skill, so we can finally start getting on a more even playing field, instead of it being that everyone only knows how to work with white people, so white people are the main people who are only getting the help. That is what I want y'all to really think about. And you can learn how to understand what's going on. You can learn about society. You can learn about the structures of society. You can learn about anti-racism and the best way to support your clients. You can learn all of those things. And as long as you know that there will be some change within yourself, right? When we all went through iPEC, I remember mod 2, it was either mod 1 or mod 2. I was crying nearly every single day because of the growth and the change. You're going to change as you level up and as you learn new things, but wanting to do that is what's going to allow you to actually serve these populations.
There's something you said reminds me of I guess it's almost like similar to our foundation principles at iPEC, but this organization that I used to partner with, one of their foundation principles was recognizing that it's most often not that our perspective is wrong, but that it's just incomplete. And so recognizing that, going back to what you're saying, you don't know what you don't know. And even those things that you do know, recognize that what you do know still isn't even the whole picture. And so being curious and staying in that learning and open mindset, and recognizing when you're in a scenario, how you initially analyze it to be, recognizing that there certainly can be more to it than just that. Because again, we're only looking from the lens that we know and our vantage point, which may be very, very different than someone else's.
Yes. Oh my God. I love how you said that. Like, what we C is not, it's not that it's wrong or what we know isn't wrong, it's that it's incomplete. That is so key. And I feel like that'll be really helpful for people who just feel discouraged in even attempting it because they're just like, well, I'm just wrong, I'm bad. No. Like I mentioned before, people who have prejudices are also good people. Everyone has them. And we need to acknowledge that it's not a bad guy versus good guy thing. We're all multifaceted human beings.
Mm-hmm. It's awareness thing. And we're all striving, hopefully, to become more aware as we can and more conscious as we can. But it's a process, right? You have to meet folks where they are. It made me think of a conversation I was having the other day. And again, I'm going to ask if you guys have questions, please feel free to put them in. But I was talking with some of the trainers here at iPEC, and we were just talking about different things to be mindful of in situations like this, actually. And it brought to mind scenario back when I was in a corporate environment, and we were working with women and people of color to help them move up in the organization. And we're talking about the different skills that they may need to have or may need more work on versus their white male peers. And one of the things that kept coming up was, you have to recognize you need to be aggressive. We're in this corporate environment. You need to speak up. And what popped out in that conversation, one of the women in the group who also happens to be from Eastern culture, she said, well, in the US, yes, you're taught to speak up. You're taught to be aggressive. You're taught that the squeaky wheel is the one that gets oiled. And it's easy for you to say to me, I just need to speak up more. But what's ingrained in me is my grandmother in my ear from the time that I was born, who, while your grandmother may have been saying the squeaky wheel gets oiled, mine was saying the loudest duck gets shot. So it doesn't make sense for me. It's built into my psyche to the point that I don't think about it, that speaking up isn't necessarily what I'm just going to naturally do, because speaking up is going to damage me more so than help me. So recognizing that perspective when you're telling someone, yeah, you need to be more aggressive, you need to be able to advocate for yourself, you want to speak up in a corporate environment, that's absolutely right, because that's the culture in that corporate environment. But recognize that everyone else's culture may not align with that. And so when you know that, you may know to approach that conversation differently. The advice at the end of the day may still be, you have to speak up, but you're going to coach them on doing that differently than just saying you need to speak up, because you know that it goes deeper than that.
Oh my gosh. What you said is exactly what I was alluding to when I was talking about the way that corporate leaders need to start seeing leadership qualities. What is a leadership quality? And that's exactly what it is. Like, there's this culture around what that looks like. But imagine if the head of whatever big company got anti-racism coaching, or I worked with an executive and changed their perception of leadership, and that executive coach then worked with that person. What can the culture of leadership look like there without forcing people to be this box that they've created as this is what a good leader looks like? Instead, shifting leadership to be a little bit more inclusive and a little bit more equitable so that more people will be qualified for that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Approaching their leadership with an empathetic and human-centered approach. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Alyssa, we are at 5 minutes to. We don't have, oh, wait, someone does have a question. And this is an interesting one. It says, thank you, Alyssa. And they want to know, what is your superpower?
I really see my my superpower as so I'm able, words on the strengths assessment, I don't remember what it's called, but the strengths assessment. One of my very top strengths is futuristic. So I am able to just see this one thing and just be like, oh my God, this is what it can look like. This is what Strengths Finder. Thank you. This is what the impact of that will be. And my client could be right here. They're like, yeah, so this is my business that I'm starting out, and I want to work with blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, look at what the impact, like I just immediately, and the reverse way too. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm also able to like look at a situation and just be like, wait a minute, that connects to this, and this. And that's what I'm talking about when like talking to people of me, you know what, it comes out a lot in coaching sessions where I'm just like, oh, you know what you mentioned there, it reminded me of a thing that I noticed in a coaching session 6 weeks ago that you may have said or alluded to. And they're like, oh my God, that is a pattern. You're right. Like I am able to see patterns and connect them for clients. And that's something that I feel like makes thinking about anti-racism work a little bit easier for me, because I'm always looking at patterns everywhere, but that's something that you can build up for yourself too.
Alyssa, thank you so much for that. And in our last 2 minutes, I want to ask you if you could only offer 2 bits of advice to coaches on how to be more aware around their gaps and or to minimize the manifestation of spiritual bypassing and or gaslighting or anything like that in their practice, what would you say to them?
Yes. In the moment where we want our clients to move forward, it's coming from our heart. We want them to succeed. We want them to get what they came for. We care about them and we don't want to see them suffering in pain. But remember that acknowledging and validating is the way to do it. And believing their truth and showing them their truth is the way to do that, and doing that as hard as you possibly can until that client is ready. And that's just like the one piece. But then the second piece is allowing yourself to be okay with what you don't know. Because that's going to be the piece where if you don't allow yourself to not know, then you're never going to grow. And once you allow yourself to see, maybe I don't know this, maybe there's something I don't understand about this, then you can go and learn about it. Those 2 things are what's going to be so helpful in working with your clients.
Alyssa, thank you for that. We have one last question. Someone asked me, if I train to be a coach at iPEC, will there be ample BIPOC trainers to choose from? And I'm going to answer that question by saying this. You don't pick your trainers. We do have diverse representation in our training and in our faculty. Could we use more? Absolutely. And are we working on that? For sure. But yes, you will see people that look like you in the group. You may not see them every day, but they absolutely do exist. Alyssa, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us.
Yeah.
I want to say for anyone that wants to get in touch with Alyssa, you can visit her website at alyssahallcoaching.com, and there's ability to email her from there. If there are any logistical questions about how to be a coach, or you have other questions about what that might look like for you, or to take the next step in your coach training journey, we've got you covered. So please visit our website in that regard. You can book a call with our admissions coach or a similar coach training admissions person. Molly, if you could put the link in the chat, that would be awesome for those that want to leverage our chat to get to that information. And also recognize we have some upcoming coaching office hours on Thursday, June 3rd at 9 a.m. Eastern time, where you could ask any type of question you may have around the iPEC program. This session will be emailed out with the recording. And so I want to thank all of you and ask that you have a great rest of the day and a great rest of your week.
Thank you.